Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Steve Birmingham, Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at Intellias. With me is Rob Flannery, the Director of Consulting Services. Rob's session today, titled Putting Your Data to Work in the AWS Cloud, will show how this solution helps you and your organization manage and access your data in the cloud through a variety of ways. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared via email after. For those of you with questions, please feel free to ask through the chat window. Rob will address these at the end of this presentation. I'm going to be handing it over to Rob here shortly, but before I do that, I would like to take a brief moment to give an overview of Intellias. Founded in 1999 and with offices in Dallas and Chicago, Intellias is an Infor Alliance partner dedicated to providing technology, application, upgrade, and cloud services. In addition to those, we also offer software solutions that assist in the areas of benefit, enrollment, and payroll functionality. So with years of industry experience, Intellias offers organizations the expertise desired to attain your project goals. So again, thank you very much for joining us. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Steve. So a quick overview of the agenda we'll cover today. Talk a little bit about the cloud proposition in general as it relates to Infor. Specifically looking at data extraction, what are some of the Infor tools available to you, since from a technology perspective, particularly in the IT department, the way we interact with our ERP in the cloud versus on-premise, may be different. A little bit of an overview of Amazon Web Services. I think everyone probably is familiar with that offering from Amazon, but specifically, how does it play into the Infor cloud environment and offer some other options, really. And at the end, we'll go through, or really throughout, some use cases and live demo of some of these functions, do some hands-on rather than just talking through them at a high level. I think it's important to note the cloud proposition. I think this is a big change. All Infor customers are really aware of and are kind of thinking through right now. It's pretty apparent as it relates to Infor and really a lot of enterprise IT functions. Cloud is first on everyone's mind as it pertains to the Infor applications. In my opinion, and I think what Infor may state is that there's really a cloud-first strategy. So applications are engineered for the cloud and to be optimized in the cloud. That being said, there are still many deployment options available. So obviously, the latest Cloud Suite bundle is their core software as a service offering. The on-premise is still supported, but I would say really in my personal opinion, and probably from a pricing perspective as well, it's not always ideal. And we'll get into that a little bit later. I think the benefits of that, why, there's a lot of reasons why. But as an Infor customer in particular, I think, economies of scale, it's an important concept to think about. Right now at the on-premise environment, customers are on all different platforms, all different versions, running different modules, different hardware. It makes it a little bit difficult to support things, or very difficult. If you think about a multi-tenant cloud environment, a true SaaS offering, having all the customers on the same platform, on the same version at the same time, is hugely beneficial. Obviously, the Infor who would be managing it, but also as a customer, there's a lot to benefit from there. Cost savings, improved performance, availability, security, freeing up development resources to add more enhancements and features rather than focusing on fixing things for a number of different deployments. So I think that economies of scale is something that's really beneficial both to you as a customer and also obviously to Infor. Now with that, there's lots of benefits, and there's also a lot of questions I get all the time about the cloud. I would say the four most common are, why would we go cloud over on-premise? Really, how am I limited in terms of database access? That seems to be the biggest thing the developers and IT departments are focused on. What am I going to do when I can't write SQL queries? What am I going to do when I can't get access to the file system? It's just a very different way of thinking about managing your application. On top of that, what's our replacement for LBI or other business intelligence solution? How are we going to handle interfaces? All those things kind of go together. Ideally, and I think a very realistic solution or ideal solution is there's no loss in functionality. We have more efficient processes and improved overall system performance. Just speaking briefly on cloud versus on-prem, I think this concept of cloud-native technologies is important to understand, and it applies to some of the latest offerings Infor's releasing. You hear about Coleman, the data lake, some of those other advanced technologies. Those are things that were built on the cloud for the cloud and really only live in the cloud. I think that's important to understand because this is a big thing that many developers and companies are adopting, is it allows you to really take advantage of the cloud and exploit all those advantages that it provides. You can build solutions that are highly available, easily scalable, and not really worrying about necessarily or having to focus so much on the dependencies for which infrastructure is deployed on premise, things like that. It also allows you to reduce the amount of overhead, internally required to operate your applications. The big key for that is, looking at cloud native solutions and cloud services to really supplement your Infor applications, taking advantage of the cloud to build on top of what is your on-premise ERP environment today. So focus a little bit on some of the Infor tools that are available first. Starting with really what I would say are the most basic or maybe sometimes obvious, but just like to cover them, and then getting into some of the more advanced or technical tools available. So at a basic level, the Spreadsheet Designer is an end user tool installed in Excel, very similar to Lawson add-ins. This is available for all the Cloud Suite applications, really whether you're on-premise or in the cloud. This is a tool, and all of these tools actually are available on-premise, just maybe have more of a justification or use case sometimes in the cloud environment. But this is going to allow business users to pull, ad hoc queries, data extracts out of the system, and also do uploads like bulk uploads. Just like how you would use the Lawson add-ins product today for V10, the Spreadsheet Designer is your like-for-like replacement with the cloud, with Cloud Suite version 11. It's not going to be ideal for processing large amounts of data, hundreds of thousands of rows, or any sort of complex, repeatable queries. It's definitely not a reporting tool. It can be helpful for pulling ad hoc data out of the system, but it's not something you want to be hitting for your reports on a day-to-day basis. There is a very robust and I think very powerful set of delivered APIs with the Cloud Suite applications. So an API allows for really programmatic access to data. This is not something that an end user is going to be interacting with necessarily, but it's something that we can use from a technology perspective to build integrations, typically in a real-time fashion between two systems. So, we've always had in Lawson the AGS and the DME query engines available. This is pretty much the equivalent, except more robust, more built on set of industry standards that allow for proper authentication via the ION API gateway using OAuth. There's full documentation available on these built into your system, and really allows you to either retrieve or transact on any data elements within the Cloud Suite environment. I did put a little notation there. If you're on Landmark 11 today, even on-premise, you do have these web services available, and you can find all the documentation that's provided for these RESTful APIs at that URL listed below. On the right there, that's just an example of a result that may be returned from one of these web services. Again, it's not meant to be consumable necessarily by end users, but more for technical interface processes. There's an XML format basically displaying information from the employee table in the database. So a full set of really robust APIs is built in and delivered with the Cloud Suite applications. Getting into some of the more unique topics, and I think Infor has been talking about these a lot more, so I think there's a little bit more awareness. But I think they're very cool features that were purposely really built because they had to satisfy needs of the cloud customers, but I think still have a lot of use cases even if you're potentially on-prem. So the replication sets and file creation utility, these are really two separate tools that kind of do the same thing, but have different purposes, I guess. What these allow you to do is create your own data extract solution, where you're pulling information out of a subset of tables or fields in the database in some sort of format. Now, a replication set is more pure data extraction. So we want to take information from this table and push it to a different database or something like that. The file creation utility does the same thing, but provides a lot more flexibility in formatting and translation of the data. It's more of an interface engine. So if you have a third-party benefits provider that you need to send demographic employee information to, typically you're writing, custom COBOL, scripting, SQL, any type of thing like that to pull that information out of the system. Very technical, very involved. The file creation utility allows for you to select tables, selection criteria, specific fields, order, format, all within the application and build a file on demand. I've used this and implemented it for a number of customers already, and I think it's really would be if you're running a landmark application and you need to write an outbound interface, this would be my go-to solution regardless of the deployment. It's very fast, flexible, efficient, and doesn't require really any programming to interact with. One of the other cool things about these, particularly the replication sets, obviously this would more be geared towards a cloud-based customer who's needing to extract data out to a relational database or something like that for reporting needs. We'll talk through that use case, but another thing that's cool that they do that I know customers have been struggling with for a long time is how do I get at that audit log information? The replication sets provide basically a built-in way to flatten that out and pull it from the system. So when you pick tables for replication sets, you can pick current data, as of a date, historical data. There's a number of different options we'll go through in the demo. But I personally think, I know customers have struggled with reporting on audit log information, breaking out some of that data into something that's consumable from a BI perspective. And I think the replication sets do a really good job of that out of the box. So if that's something your organization's struggling with today or curious about, this would be a great use case for that as well. Really, these are meant for either those interfacing engines or building your own data lake, data warehouse solution. These are ideal for large amounts of data. We can provide entire extracts, so full files, and then we can also do incremental replication where we're only pulling changes from the last time the replication ran. The last two utilities we'll talk about that are Infor delivered, and obviously there's a lot of different tools that Infor provides. I just tried to pick on kind of 4 primary ones, but you do still have full database import and export commands. I wouldn't use this for shipping things off necessarily to a data warehouse, but it does provide, and Infor really provides in their administration console in the cloud, a web-based system administration center that lets you have access to some of those utilities you were used to doing on the server or in LID, for example. And these are 2 that can be used there. So exporting an entire table, probably the fastest way to dump data out of the system, but it's going to be in the format that it is in the GHR database. So there's not as much transformation capabilities or limitation capabilities. Whereas the replication set, we can pick and choose fields, we can include selection criteria, for example, all active employees. This is just really going to be a pure export the database or import records into the database, maybe a staging table or things like that. So similar, but different use cases here. And then anything that's exported out of the system or imported into it is going to be done through like an SFTP server. So if you're running in Infor's cloud, they do provision an SFTP server for you, and that's where the output or input of these two commands would be placed. So for the use case number one, or for these live demos, I try to come up with use cases that customers ask me about from time to time. So a basic requirement would be that an organization is currently running Lawson on-premise, and they have several interfaces which depend on SQL to pull data for a third-party vendor. They're evaluating a move to Infor's Cloud Suite applications and are concerned about the ability to write efficient data extracts without access to the database. So obviously, things like IPA can sometimes not be super performant. Obviously, add-in sometimes is not super performant. So a lot of organizations fall to or default to using SQL to pull the data directly. And in the Cloud Suite environment, that's not always going to be an option necessarily, or it won't be directly. So the solution we'll look at for this would be, again, this file creation utility we just talked about. So I'll walk through a demo of it, but again, at a high level, this is Infor delivered. It is part of the Landmark runtime environment. So if you have Landmark version 11X, there's some CU you need to be on to have this available. This is going to be delivered out of the box. It could be used on-premise or in the cloud, and for any Landmark applications you have running. It's extremely efficient, very fast, and allows you to send either full files or these incremental changes. And I think the coolest thing about this is, while it's not completely easy to build and configure, it absolutely does not require any programming. It's all done through the application. It's click and drag configuration and setup. So you don't necessarily need to be a programmer to interact with this type of utility. It's set up right in the application. So to cover a very quick diagram of how this would work, basically, let's pretend you are needing to transfer this file to via SFTP to a vendor's file server. You would be building and running the FCU for the file creation utility within your Infor application. From there, it will generate a file, and then we need to process the file. So that'll either be done via IPA or ION. Transferring it there would be done, or potentially encrypting it, whatever the requirements are. It's really just moving the file. It's not doing any generation or management of the file at that point. And then copying it over via SFTP to some file server. So get into the live demo. Let me go ahead and pull this up. So I'm in my application right now, and this happens to be GHR. I just tend to pick on the employee extract because it's familiar for everybody and pretty easy to understand. So to build a file creation utility, we come in here and create one and give it a description. So this is just the name for our FCU. And then we need to pick our source file. So it's important to note that not every table in the application is available for extract with the FCU. The replication sets, yes. The FCU kind of has these predefined targeted tables per application. Again, this is GHR, so it's HR-specific data that you can select from. So I'll just pick the employee, and then how do we want to build the file. So I'm going to generate just a separated file, but you can do fixed length. I know that can be a difficult one for programmers to manage. This handles it pretty well. So fixed length or separated. What do we want to use as our field delimiter? I'm just going to use a pipe. What's our output file name? Create a CSV, and then it allows you to build the timestamp also on that. Do the formatting in a second. The next options are to pick a process flow or ION. So again, this would be transferring the file to a third-party system, encrypting the file. All of those things are going to be done by IPA. You're probably still using IPA for some of that processing today, but the difference here is all the extraction, transformation of that data is not occurring in IPA. It's occurring before the IPA or ION process runs. Those are simply just picking it up and moving it somewhere effectively. So I'm going to turn that off for now, and no reason to go through the extra configuration, but if you wanted to trigger a flow, you would just select it here. I'm also going to leave a header off, but you can specify headers and footers and things like that when we run the file. We can now build our timestamp format. So what do I want to, how do I want to timestamp the file? I'm just going to do YYMMDD. Lots of different options are available. And we'll go ahead and save. So at this point, we're ready to build our data extract. So we create a mapping record here. This is going to be our row. So in this example, I really just have one row per record. It's going to be the employee data row, and this is going to contain fields from the employee file for each record that I find. We can do conditional lookups and compare, so we can include selection criteria in here, like active employees only, employees from a specific organization unit, things like that. But for now, I'm just going to do a full export of everything. Go ahead and save that off. And then now that I have my data row created, I can add data to it. So what columns do I want in my data row, basically? Click this Add Fields button, and then I'll go do that kind of quick. We'll click on our data row, click Add Fields, and it gives us a selector. So what options are available? We can pull some information from the audit log, different tabs here that are available. I'm just going to pick pretty basic information. I want the employee number, I want the first name, and I want the last name. I don't remember that one. Family name. Oh, there we go. Save the columns. And at this point, we're ready to generate the file. So I'll activate my file export. And then there's two options here, generate and preview or generate file. So the generate, we can preview the records before it builds the file, or we can just go straight to generating the file. I generally pick the generate preview and then build the file afterwards. And then this is going to go ahead and run in the background. So while this is running, it's going to be building a file that will pull all the records at this point, because I haven't selected the all records bucket. So it's going to pull everything it has in the database now, and then the next time it runs, it's only going to pull things based on the last update stamp. It should be a file here. It's already created it. So I can pull up this file and see that the data is here in the file output. You can download the file here, send it off to a vendor, or again, we could use IPA or ION to transfer it. So all within those couple clicks, I was able to generate a file containing certain fields from the database on an incremental fashion to be transferred out. There was no programming involved. It's simply really just a lot of selection. You can also go back in if we want to add additional fields. Let's say I also want to have information from the work assignment. Let's also include the org unit and the job. Go ahead and save those columns off. And then we can go in there and go ahead and regenerate the file. And the cool thing about this is it does save history. So all within the application, you have a historical record and listing of each file that's been created by the tool. So that this is from our first run. And then as the next one, oh, I made a mistake. So it's not building a file because it's looking at this last timestamp and no transactions have happened in the past minute. So to override that, I'm just going to say I want to pull all records all the time, depending on your use case. Obviously, that selection may be different, but for the purposes of the demo, we're just going to be doing full files out of here. There we go. So it's built the file, it's populating it. My new file is available. You can preview it here. You can see the additional 2 columns have been added. You can also go ahead and download it, open it up in Excel, anything like that. So, someone asked a quick question. Can the FCU put quotes around the string fields to account for embedded commas? Yes. So I made that mistake accidentally. There's another field here for the field, the field delimiter. So if I put a comment or a quote in here, it would use that to enclose the fields. And then the separator is how we actually delimit the records. So lots of flexibility in what you use for a separator, what you use for a delimiter. Obviously, we just showed a separated or delimited file, but we can also do fixed width pretty easily with this tool as well. So final thoughts with use case number 1. I mean, I really like this tool. It's one I'm implementing out in the field for a lot of different customer solutions. It's very fast, very flexible, and there's simple configuration. It's really great, and I would say almost your go-to solution for outbound interfacing feeds. It's also available, obviously, I think Infor built this because of the cloud customer base, but if you're on-prem, you can still use this, and in some cases, I would say it's better than some of the traditional methods you may be using to pull data out of the system to provide to other third-party vendors. But it does have limited capabilities for reporting and analysis. So this has a very targeted specific use case of building interface feeds to other systems. If you're looking to do reporting, analysis, a BI on your existing data, this could work, but it kind of falls short, right? It's creating a spreadsheet effectively. We need to build a BI solution, a robust solution around a number of tables in the database and be able to relate them and tie them to them in different ways, kind of on demand. So what we're kind of seeing is that there may be a hybrid approach to your cloud adoption. Take advantage of Infor SaaS offerings. I think what they offer in the cloud is personally where I would want to be as a customer, just seeing where their roadmap is, where the new technologies are being deployed, kind of what the focus is, particularly for the customer, from a customer base perspective. I would want to be running Infor SaaS offerings, but they may not get you 100% of the way there, looking at your whole ecosystem, everything you use to support your ERP. And so supplement that with, we're going to focus on some AWS services, but other cloud provider services as needed. The big takeaway from this is moving to the cloud really shouldn't mean you're losing out on functionality. So just a very quick overview of AWS and why we pick on this ultimately. It is the public cloud provider that Infor builds all their cloud applications on or hosts them on. But it's also available for you to run any type of workload you would be interested in within AWS. So they are a cloud computing public cloud provider with a global reach. I think that's the key thing here for public cloud, is that really the reliability, scalability, and arguably sometimes the security and infrastructure provided by these public cloud providers would be very difficult to reproduce on-premise, economically speaking. There's also a number of services, hundreds and hundreds of services that can really be categorized into 2 categories. There's IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, and then the platform as a service, or PaaS. So where does cloud computing fit within your IT enterprise, roles and responsibilities? I like to just look at this quick diagram to outline where that really lies. This is generic and looking at, cloud in general and focused on AWS, I guess, but really you could use this to focus on your Infor applications as well, assuming those are, true SaaS Cloud Suite applications in the multi-tenant. The lighter boxes here are customer managed. The darker boxes here are vendor managed, right? So on-premise environment, you're managing everything from the networking, the physical storage, all the way up to your applications. So basically you end-to-end own and control everything. As we get further and further right in the diagram, basically you're handing over responsibilities to some other vendor, or they are managing that for you. So with the IaaS, or really like virtual servers in the cloud, could be classified as this. You're really just dealing with the operating system, right? They give you a virtual server. You don't know how it's virtualized, what kind of really ultimately host server it's running on, what the storage is, how the networking's set up. You really have no control over that. You manage the operating system on up. This is a core offering within AWS and also the platform as a service. This is where I really want to focus. Traditionally people think of cloud computing as hosted servers, but I think the real power in cloud computing, particularly from a development perspective, is in this concept of a platform as a service. And so we're focused on the applications and data, but what some of these platforms as a service will allow us to do is build, operate, execute code without necessarily having to worry about or manage the underlying servers and database on which it's running on. We're really just responsible for our code itself and the applications that it would support. And then the software as a service, this is going to be where Infor's Cloud Suite comes in. Ultimately, pretty much Infor and AWS are going to be managing all of it, and you're really just responsible for using the application. You're not patching it. You're really just using it and doing some end user testing, validation, things like that on a day-to-day basis. Not as much control over it. So why did we pick AWS to focus on? They are really kind of the leading cloud provider. But most notably, as I mentioned earlier, there's a pretty tight integration with Infor's cloud. So Infor's own applications are in Infor's cloud that's running in AWS. A lot of their technology offerings are built on AWS solutions. And then there's native integrations with some of the AWS services in things like IPA and ION. Ultimately, there's hundreds of services to really help power your enterprise applications with a number of these cloud providers, but we'll focus on the AWS ones in specific. This is just a quick overview of some of the key services AWS does offer. I'm not going to go through them in much detail, but understand that there's really kind of 5 main categories, and there's something there for pretty much any solution you could need. Networking, compute storage, database, object storage, and analytics solutions. All of that is provided within the AWS portfolio. I think the concept of serverless is something somewhat new, but I think important to talk about, and it's one of the focuses of some of these solutions we're presenting, is that the concept here is we can develop and deploy code really without worrying about the server, so that platform as a service. I think that's hugely beneficial, really when you're looking at a cloud adoption in general, because you go away from having to manage that server. So if you're going to build an add-on solution to support Infor or some other application to sit alongside it, if you're getting rid of your on-premise Infor environment, getting rid of that infrastructure, you have the ability now in the public cloud to build solutions that are serverless and don't depend on those types of servers. So in the spirit of moving to the cloud within your Infor applications, as you build solutions to support them, keep with that theme. Don't necessarily try to be tied back to some of your on-premise infrastructure. The benefits of that is, from a cost perspective, you're only charged for the space you used. So you don't have to pay to procure a giant server that sits there regardless of the load that's hitting it. You're only paying for what you use when you use it. It's inherently scalable architecture, really kind of infinitely scalable with the way it's set up in the public cloud. And many popular languages are supported, Python, Node.js, Java, things like that, to build solutions with these serverless architectures. So for the second use case, basically we're going through the ability to need to run SQL queries against the data. So in a Cloud Suite environment where you don't have access to the database, how do we need to run queries in this use case, and how do we do that? What would that look like in a Cloud Suite environment? So the goal here is I am going to go through it relatively quickly in the interest of time, but all of this is being built from scratch. I have an AWS account. I have an Infor environment. I'm going to be able to build an end-to-end solution that allows me to write queries against data without needing to log into a database. So for this, we'll be using the replication sets to extract specific tables and fields from Cloud Suite. We are going to have to transform the data, so we'll be using some AWS services for that. And then ultimately, we need to load it somewhere into a relational database or data warehouse for additional reporting needs. This is a diagram of what that would look like. Now we're getting into some of the AWS terms, but we'll be using the replication sets to push information to object storage, an S3 bucket. Be using AWS Glue to build a schema of the data and transform it. And then in this example, I use this tool called Athena to write queries against it, but you could put it into a fully managed data warehouse in what's called Redshift, or into a traditional fully managed relational database, like SQL Server, Oracle, things like that. All of these solutions are running in the cloud. There's no on-premise infrastructure required to support it. So the way the replication sets are built, and again, I'm going to focus on AWS because I think that's a very viable solution, but you could change AWS with Azure. You could change a cloud storage solution or hosted database with an on-prem database. I mean, this concept would work the same regardless. I just think some of the feature sets and solutions provided by AWS really provide a lot of additional flexibility and functionality. So our replication set setup, I have pre-created one here. Again, it's very similar to file creation utilities. We're running export, description, replication set. We need to specify the format of the data. So like I said earlier, this is more for dumping data. We're not doing detailed transformations of it for an interface feed. There's less options. I'm picking the JSON format. In this example, I actually am running an on-premise landmark server, so I'm just putting it to the directory that we would be doing FTP or IMS in the cloud. And then we pick our tables or our business classes we want to pull out from. So you can pick specific, you don't have to dump the whole database. I wouldn't recommend dumping the whole database. Pick the tables that are important and the fields within those tables that you need to target. So if you look at employee, there's a specific list of fields here. Some options we have, we can put conditions in here too. So only active employees, employees from a specific location, things like that. Data to extract. Current data is how I have it set now, but we could also pull, like I said, those audit log entries. This is a flattened audit log entry or report pulled out via the replication sets. You can also pull future data entries if that's something you're interested in. So in order to run these replication sets, generally they are going to be on a schedule. We would click here, replicate, and run it, every 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. I'm just going to run mine once because I'm doing the demo here. So I reset it because it will do incremental replication. I'm not actively transacting in the system, so each time I'm running a full replication. It's going to go through and run in the background an async and process all the files based on what we selected down here. So out on my server, you can see it's dumping all these files out. At this point, we would normally have some sort of transfer automated, likely through FTP, to pick up the files. To keep the demo more short, basically we're going to just manually copy them. So I've jumped over to AWS console right now. I'm creating a bucket for object storage. So I'm going to give it a name. This is basically just a place to hold all the files. So I've created a bucket. I'm just going to drag and drop, upload them into AWS. I files are being uploaded. The first time you do this, again, it's going to be a full file. From here on out, next time the replication runs, it's going to be incremental. So we're not going to get a full record set. We might not even get any records if there haven't been any transactions that are occurring. The first time you run these replications will be the longest time, really, every time. Now that the data is in here, we can go into what's called AWS Glue. So we have flat files in the system. We need to transform them likely and either put them somewhere and load them into a database for querying, or what's really cool about this tool is it will read the files automatically, develop a schema, and actually allow you to write queries against them directly. So there's no relational database whatsoever. All of this is done through the cloud services and directly on the flat files. So we're going to come in here and we're going to add what's called a crawler. And we're going to essentially tell this crawler where to go and look. We're going to tell it to look at that bucket we just created. Webinar Intellias demo. Let's go look here, crawl through that, and automatically build me a schema. Okay, so our crawler's created. We're going to go ahead and run it. It should take about a minute to run. And effectively, what's going to happen when this processes, we're transforming that data, building the schema. I'm going to be able to run queries against it immediately. You don't have to run the query over and over again. This is because I set it up the first time. So now that the crawler's been run, the schema is available, there's files there, I'm going to be able to run queries against them using a serverless query tool to extract data from or report on data right out of these flat files. The tool I'm going to be using is web-based. It's a console-based tool. However, you can connect to it via any ODBC connection. So any type of application or tool that supports an ODBC connection to a database could be hooked up to query this data very easily. The other option would be, we can load it to a traditional database, on-premise, cloud hosted, or otherwise. What that's going to give you, obviously, is much increased performance, but also at a much increased cost, right, for SQL Server licenses or Oracle license or what have you. The benefit of this tool is, A, it's very easy to set up and demo, but B, it's a serverless technology, serverless query language. I'm only paying for the resources I use as I consume them. So I don't pay a license fee to use it. I pay a minimal fee to run queries against it. Depending on the frequency of those queries, the complexity of those queries, this is an extremely cheap way to run ad hoc reports and SQL queries against your data without having to purchase a full database license or anything like that. The next step would be, if you were looking for a true data warehouse solution, is to purchase something like that. You can host it in AWS. I gave a couple examples like that, or it could be on-prem or with any other cloud provider. But you would basically pipe the files from the replication set out to whatever other system. Another thing to think about with that is, I just talked to another customer who said, well, we have this on-premise application, totally homegrown, that's still going to exist, but it's dependent on our Lawson database for access to information. Well, the Lawson database is going away when we migrate to the cloud, but we still need for that on-premise app to function properly. So one of the things we talked about was using these replication sets to extract the data, and then an ETL process to not only load it into some new format, but also we were able to think about transforming it into the old Lawson format. So that gives you the ability to basically leave that application as is, extract data out of the version 11 system, and format it in terms of the table names and the column names in exactly what this on-premise third-party application was needing to support and run. So there's more use cases for this than just reporting needs. Really, any other type of extract can take advantage of this solution. So the crawlers ran, it's added 2 tables automatically. If we go look at our databases, we can see that it's built a webinar demo. There's tables in here, employee and work assignment. So if I go into my Athena query tool, pick out my webinar demo, you can also see them here, and you can run queries just like you would in SQL, either right in the console or, like I said, through any ODBC connection. Here's all the data out of the GHR database. And this supports, relatively complex query operations. And then again, you can load this information into SQL Server, Oracle, some other alternative true relational database if more performance and power is needed. Okay, back to the... So some final thoughts with this. Particularly in the recent updates, Infor does actually now provide some query capabilities with the ION data lake, or what they're calling Compass, and also with Burst. Those are usable. Some of them do require additional licensing costs, and they're definitely something to consider. Why we focus on the AWS offerings is that it offers all that and more, right? So if you want to tie into a fully managed cloud-hosted relational database, data warehouse solution, even an on-premise database, that is all an option. I think it's also, thinking outside the Infor environment, if you have a enterprise BI solution that's dealing with more than Infor, pumping all of that into the data lake is probably not going to be the best solution, right? So can something like AWS or some other cloud solution be used to support Infor and your non-Infor systems in that true enterprise BI analytics capacity? Another thing to note is that a lot of Infor's tools are built on the same technology I just showed you. So when Infor talks about the data lake, that's really, generally AWS S3, Amazon S3 object storage. So just because you might not be using Infor's direct tools, but you're using AWS's tools, doesn't necessarily mean you're missing out. It probably gives you more options and more flexibility longer term. Ultimately, you need to evaluate which options are best for your organization and make a decision from there. What about on-premise? We talked about cloud. With AWS and really, Azure, any of these providers, obviously they understand that organizations still have a need to run servers on-premise. Within AWS specifically, they have tools like Direct Connect or VPN Tunnel, which ultimately makes it so that these resources on-premise and the cloud can communicate with one another. So that hybrid environment or ecosystem is supported and is very common within enterprise IT. One last thing to point out is that total cost of ownership. Some of the tools I looked at or talked about here are obviously newer. Maybe your organization has never looked at AWS before. Maybe you have a lot of things running in AWS. But I think it's important to call out that with the cloud, it really in general, you're shifting your focus from capital to operational expenditures. So with the AWS pricing model, it is pay as you go. It is flexible. There still are volume discounts. And ultimately, you're saving that economies of scale concept. AWS does at times, or it's 67 times since 2006, passed back savings to the customer and reduced cost of some of their services. But ultimately, because it is so flexible, because it is pay-as-you-go, it's very easy to try. So if anything, we looked at here seems interesting, other than signing up for an account, it's not like you're locked in to a $20,000 commitment. You can literally get a free account, log in, and play with things for 12 months and not spend $1. Or if you want to scale things up and you commit to a large server reservation, you can opt to pay for it per minute or per hour, and you want to terminate it, you stop paying for it. So there's no long-term commitment from an asset perspective. Like there's nothing you need to account for, and the aging of it, how long we need to run that for it to be, profitable or whatever. It's all flexible, pay as you go. So ultimately, in summary, I think it's important if Infor is on your roadmap long-term, you're aligning your organization with Infor's cloud-first strategy. But understand there's no reason to sacrifice that functionality with a move to the cloud. In the spirit of cloud adoption, cloud migration, make sure you're taking advantage of that managed infrastructure and serverless technology these public cloud providers offer. And ultimately, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Every customer is different. Every implementation is different. We have a number of AWS and Infor certified consultants at Intellias who'd be happy to talk to your organization about how AWS and/or Infor solutions can work for you. Due to that pay-as-you-go nature, it's really easy to try before you buy. Small pilots, prototypes, things like that are a great way to make sure things are going to work before you ultimately make a larger investment or decision. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for their time again. Again, my name is Rob Flannery, the Director of Services here at Intellias. At this point, I'd like to see if there's any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. And obviously, otherwise, if you think of something later, my contact information's up on the webinar, and feel free to reach out directly as well. There's one question: can FCU handle huge tables such as AC Trans or Geo Transrel? Yes. It will take longer to run, but ultimately, the first time it's turned on, it may take a long time to run for some massive tables, but I think it's important to understand that incremental replication concept. So for the large tables you have running, it may be really slow the first time they run, but subsequent runs that are processing incrementally should be a bit faster. I don't see any other. Steve, did you see any questions in the chat? I only had two that I already answered.
No, but as a reminder, we will be sending out this replay in an email with contact information, so we can certainly get back to anybody who has a question later. Rob, if you are finished, I will thank everybody for joining us today. We sincerely appreciate it. This concludes the webinar. Have a great day. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks.